Hello and welcome to Let's Keep Moving with the APDA. Today's episode is Overcoming Freezing of Gait, Tips, Tricks, and Tech. My name is Tim Nordahl and I'm a physical therapist at the BU Center for Neuro Rehab. I'll give you a quick introduction to the team. So we're the Center for Neuro Rehab at Boston University. We're a team of researchers and physical therapists who work to optimize rehabilitation for people with Parkinson's. During today's presentation, we're first going to define and describe freezing of gait. We'll discuss some common triggers that occur for freezing of gait. We'll talk about some strategies to reduce freezing of gait. And finally, we'll talk about some technologies that may help freezing of gait. A brief disclaimer, it's just important to keep in mind that this presentation is meant to be general information for you. So please make sure that you're working with your healthcare providers, including your physical therapist and your neurologist, to discuss the strategies that we bring up today and see what would be most helpful for you. So next, we're going to talk about what freezing of gait is. I imagine that probably many of you tuned in today already knowing what freezing of gait is and wanting some help with it. But I just want to take a quick minute to make sure that we're on the same page when we say the words freezing of gait. So freezing of gait is considered an episodic gait disturbance that can occur with Parkinson's, which means that it's different from some of the more kind of constant or continuous gait problems that can occur with Parkinson's. So it's different than the kind of constant trouble with gait speed or smaller steps that people can have. Freezing is considered a temporary inability to take a step forward despite the intention to walk. People will kind of describe this as feeling like their feet are glued to the floor. I'd like to really quickly play a video that is it's on the Lancet Journal's YouTube channel, which is a really good demonstration of what we mean when we say freezing of gait. So we'll play that clip now, and there's going to be a gentleman sort of walking away from us. You'll notice as he gets to the carpet right here, he's experienced a freezing of gait episode. You can see he's still trying to walk forward, but for a few seconds, he was unable to continue to step forward. So just so you have a visual, that's more or less what we're talking about when we say freezing of gait. Just to complicate things a little bit more, researchers have identified a few different types of freezing. So you may experience a sort of trembling at your knees or suddenly taking very, very short steps or a complete lack of motion. All three of those can be a freezing episode. We think it's relatively common with Parkinson's, but I want to emphasize that not everybody gets it. Depending on who you read, there's about 40-50% of people with Parkinson's experience freezing of gait, but it does seem to get more common as Parkinson's progresses. So what causes freezing of gait? Unfortunately, we don't know the exact cause of it. It's still an active area of research. But broadly speaking, the loss of dopamine that occurs in Parkinson disease causes the control of your walking to become less automatic. So the picture on the left of this slide shows you how normally the control of your walking is achieved through balanced contribution from areas of the brain like the cerebellum in the back of the brain, the basal ganglia, which is that green circle in the middle, and then the higher level motor centers of the brain, which are kind of how you think about moving your body, and then it goes. The basal ganglia in particular helps to make your walking more automatic And this automaticity is what is lost when the brain can't produce enough dopamine in Parkinson's disease. So we'll put up another picture that demonstrates a current theory of how the brain compensates and how freezing emerges. In this picture on the right, you can see the breakdown in the circuitry we normally use to walk. You can see that the basal ganglia is kind of shaded in, and some of these connections between the basal ganglia and the cerebellum and the higher level motor centers are that kind of dashed line to represent the interruption in that circuitry. You can also see an increase in activity represented by those heavier arrows that are connecting the cognitive, motor, and sensory centers in the higher level of the brain to your movement. We think this is part of why freezing is more likely during more complicated tasks like walking and speaking to someone at the same time. That increase in input from the cognitive and sensory portions of the brain are also how some of the strategies that we'll cover in a couple of slides can actually help. So more on that later. Another interesting aspect to this theory is the input from the limbic system, which is that red center in the bottom of the brain in the second picture. The limbic system is part of our emotional response to situations. And this is a way of representing how stress and anxiety can contribute to freezing and make it more likely to occur or make it worse. So on our next slide, we think the scientists are still working on a complete understanding of the brain physiology of what causes freezing. But another question to ask you is what causes freezing during your day-to-day routine? So what causes freezing for you? Some common triggers are known, and I wanted to know if you're aware of a certain activity or time of day or conditions that contribute to your freezing. This is a great chance for us to learn from each other. So please, if you're comfortable, write in the chat when you notice your freezing to be more common, because I'm hoping we'll be able to talk a little bit more about this in the question and answer period. I have on the slide a few pictures of some common triggers for freezing. These can be certain movements, like starting to walk. That's why I have someone on the starting line of a race. So sometimes as you get up from a chair and you try to take that first step, you're more likely to freeze. Turning, as you can see with those footprints, is another very common trigger. It can also be tied to environments that you move through. So things like doorways or crowds can be really difficult. Your cognitive state, so walking while distracted, can make freezing a lot more likely. I know we mentioned that on an earlier slide too. Your emotional state, so your stress or anxiety, can make it more likely. And also where you're at with your medication schedule. So some people experience freezing, particularly when their medications are wearing off and they're due for their next dose. The main point of this slide is that thinking about when you freeze and kind of really pinpointing your triggers might help you in a few minutes or discussing with your PT, prioritize which of these strategies we'll discuss to try first. In terms of treatments for freezing of gait, the medication commonly prescribed for Parkinson's disease and deep brain stimulation even, they often don't completely get rid of freezing. And if they help, they might not help as much over time. So that's left us with prioritizing different strategies that will help with your freezing in your day-to-day life. Some of the strategies that I'll bring up in our next few slides may be things you've heard of already. It may be things you've tried before, But I'm hoping there may be one or two new things in there, or we may teach you a new approach to implementing some of these strategies in your day-to-day life. So we'll go over a few different types of strategy. And the first category that I'd like to cover is what we call external cueing. This is any sort of sensory cue that helps you step rhythmically to avoid freezing. The most commonly used and accessible types of external cues are either visual cues or auditory cueing. Visual cues work by giving you something on the floor to step to. And I have one picture up on the slide here. If you take a look at the white tape marks that are going through the doorway and around a corner, this would be an example of how we would set up visual cues to guide someone through a doorway and into a right turn. This is actually something I use in our clinic to help someone who had to make this exact style of turn to get into his bathroom at night. So again, this is to guide you through the doorway and then take a right turn, both of which, like we just discussed, are common freezing triggers. The things that I want to point out about the visual cues, in this case, those lines are placed at even intervals apart. They contrast strongly with the floor, so it's sort of a blue carpet and white tape so that it's really easy to see. And the lines are also perpendicular to your walking path. So it's sort of like kind of bending around that turn so that if you're following the lines, it's going to guide you right through that. There are also some newer versions of visual cueing using lasers that I'll talk a little more about when we get into some technological options for freezing. Then we have auditory cueing, and this is sound-based cueing, can help with freezing as well. The most commonly used versions of auditory cueing are either a metronome or music. And I have an example of both for you. So when we play the track, you'll first hear the ticking of the metronome, then we'll have an instrumental song come on over it. The idea with either of these types of cues are that you would step to the beat of the auditory cueing. Again, you're going to hear the metronome and the music at the same time, but just imagine your footfalls occurring as you hear this beat. So you would be thinking about stepping on the beat. So I'll have Katie play a track, about 20 seconds of this track, so you can get the gist of it. That's great. Thank you so much. So something to keep in mind that is that you should work out some of the details of how to set up these cues with a physical therapist coaching you, because sometimes the type of cue, as in auditory or visual, can be the difference between something that makes you freeze less or could make it a little bit worse. And there's a lot of details here, like the exact distance between the tape lines and the cadence of the metronome or music, like how fast it is, can require some trial and error to figure out exactly what's going to help you the most. The audio track we just played was set to 80 beats per minute, which is kind of a way to slow you down and make sure you're concentrating on larger steps. Just to give you a concrete example. So on our next slide, we'll talk about internal strategies. So these are sort of things that you can change your point of focus or your mental state to help you walk your best. The first category you could consider are prompted instructions. These can be things that sort of take that higher level motor center and really kind of get you focused on how you're walking and how you're timing your steps. One example could be counting your steps, so counting 1, 2, 1, 2, or focusing on a specific aspect of your gait. Like if your freezing starts with your left foot, you could really think about landing on your heel with that step every time. Motor imagery, or what's called action observation, is another concept. Motor imagery is where, let's say you have a lot of trouble getting into your bathroom. Before you get up and try it out, you sort of, in your head, you sort of rehearse it mentally and you visualize yourself, visualize how you're going to step and how you take your steps forward as you walk. Action observation is another related concept that as you watch a specific difficult task, you want to kind of watch someone who doesn't freeze do it. So if you're in a crowd, you watch somebody go through an elevator and try to copy them. Another thing to do is altering your mental state. So this could be various strategies to increase your alertness and your attention to walking and reduce the anxiety and stress leading into specific situations that could cause freezing. I definitely understand that's easier said than done, but trying to approach those as sort of calmly and relaxed as you can help you focus on the strategies and reduce some of that limbic input that we talked about in an earlier slide. So the final broad category of strategy on our next slide would be changing how you plan to move through the environment. So changing the balance requirements of certain activities, like if you're turning, planning on taking a wider turn, or exaggerating your weight shifting before you step, can help you take that bigger step and reduce the freezing. Some people find just adopting a new walking pattern helpful, which theoretically can help you use a new motor program that's not affected by freezing. These can be things like lifting your knee up high as you walk, so sort of marching instead of just trying to walk forward, or some people have described sort of walking in an ice skating type motion. Of course, doing your best to avoid multitasking and trying to make sure that your home is decluttered so you're not running into those situations where your attention is divided in a bunch of different directions. And finally, consider an assistive device. If your freezing is causing falling, this might not prevent you from freezing, but it should reduce the risk of freezing by keeping you a bit safer if you're using something like a walker when you could freeze. So on our next slide, we've talked about the different sort of categories of strategy that you can use. But coming back to my earlier question and thinking about what makes you freeze may help you decide what to try first. We don't have, one king strategy. So thinking about, does your freezing happen in a doorway or in your bedroom? Does it happen while you're walking down the sidewalk or navigating crowds or trying to answer a question? You can imagine that it may be easier to implement some of the strategies we've talked about at different times or others. So if you found something particularly helpful, I'd love to hear in the chat what you're using and what you find most reliable for you. This particular study I have up was a really interesting one by Dr. Anouk Tusserams and colleagues. It came out in 2021. It asked 4,000 participants what they were using for their gait impairments. It wasn't specifically asking about freezing of gait, but they did have a substantial group of people who had freezing who were going through a questionnaire listing these types of strategies to see what helped them most. People who had freezing seemed to find that changing the balance requirements like we talked about, so taking wider turns or shifting their weight a little bit more, was their most helpful strategy, followed by altering their mental state and adapting a new walking pattern or internal cueing was sort of the third choice. The researchers grouped auditory and visual cueing into one question, which a slightly smaller, we don't know why, because this is a category of cueing that seems really effective in the research, but it may speak to the difficulty of either, kind of dialing in some of those details of the cadence and the distance between the visual lines like we talked about. Or it could speak to the difficulty of kind of having these cues follow you throughout the day. So this is where there's potentially a role for technology that I want to talk about in our next couple of slides. So like I had mentioned, one of the potential drawbacks for external cueing is that it's hard to set it up ahead of time. It's hard to have those lines on the floor before you freeze. Technology here has a role to make it more available throughout your day and follow with you as you go. I want to emphasize the APDA is not necessarily endorsing any of these products, and this definitely isn't an exhaustive list of everything that's on the market, but I just wanted to give you a couple of concrete examples more so that you kind of are aware of some of the options that are out there. So the first one I wanted to mention are these laser mounted shoes that are created by a company called Walk With Path. So these laser pointers mount right on your shoe so that you have a visual cue that's sort of, if you can see in the picture, the left foot is projecting a line in front of this person's right foot so that they have a cue that is going to follow them as they step every step of the way. If we click for the next picture, the next example is the U-Step walker. This is a particular walker that has an optional add-on for laser cueing. So if you're sort of just safer using a walker in general, you can hold on to this and have the cueing module, which has both a built-in metronome and a laser line that I simulated with this kind of red mark that I drew over the picture that you would step up to. The U-Step company, InStep Mobility, also makes a cane that has this same cueing module built into the cane, if you prefer using an assistive device like that. And then the third option is Next Stride. So this is another interesting product that has a similar laser cue and metronome, but it's something that you can mount onto any assistive device that you use. So the device is about this big, and if you use a walker and a cane, or if you have a couple of different assistive devices, you can take this Next Stride cueing device off of one and attach it to the other. Insurance and out-of-pocket costs can definitely be a barrier to obtaining devices like these. So there are some kind of lower tech options that you could try with the coaching of a physical therapist. Some people will just hold a laser pointer directed at the floor and step up to the line or dot that the laser pointer is projecting onto the floor. In previous episodes of Let's Keep Moving, we've also covered things like free metronome apps that are available for Apple or Android. And I've even had patients call out to Alexa or OK Google and ask them to play marching or parade music to help them across the room when they're having trouble getting around their house. So those are some options that are currently available in the marketplace. On the next slide, I'll show you a couple of different newer options that are not yet widely available. So if you remember our last installment of Let's Keep Moving with Teresa Baker and Francino Porciuncula, there's a robotic system they're currently working on, and other researchers have worked on similar systems that we're trying to find a way to use robotic assistance or cueing that can help people with freezing maintain their step rhythm and avoid freezing. So this picture up on the right is from the case study that Francino and his colleagues published recently on their soft robotic exosuit. This gives you a gentle assist at the hip to guide you into your next step. Another thing that researchers have looked into is augmented reality. So on the next click, augmented reality refers to the use of a display from a technological device like this headset that's over what you're actually seeing in the room. Which is different from virtual reality, which is just completely immersive. You're kind of looking down your hallway, and there's a potential that augmented reality systems could display visual cues for you to step to as you walk and move through any environment that you need it. And then the third example I wanted to give you is called on-demand cueing. So this particular system is from a recently published study, the DFOG study. One of the big innovations with this system is that it used sensors mounted on people's shoes to detect if they were starting to freeze, and then a personalized auditory cue would be played on headphones that they were wearing after the sensors detected freezing. This could make the auditory cueing a little bit more responsive, and it would be a little bit more helpful because you don't have to think to play a cue before you might freeze. It actually just kicks in as soon as you start. As you can imagine, researchers are still working to make sure that the technology works as well as it can. So stay tuned for more updates on these in the future. But to recap what we covered today, we discussed the current state of our understanding of freezing of gait. We don't know exactly what causes it, but we know when it's more common, what kind of movement triggers can make it more likely to occur. It doesn't happen to everyone, but it is considered fairly common with Parkinson's disease. We described how medication and deep brain stimulation may help, but are not often enough to help control the problem. We covered strategies that can include external cueing, changing the focus of your attention or your mental state, and changing your movement plan, like taking wider turns or avoiding distractions when you walk. We then pointed out a few ways that technology can help deliver these cues across your day in ways that weren't possible even a few years ago. And we finished by discussing a few options which may be available to the public in the future with more research. The big picture here is there's a lot of things that could help, but the right solution will come down to personal factors and what situations seem most linked to your freezing. I really suggest, if you haven't found something that works for you, to work with a physical therapist to help you coach you through these strategies and how to try things. So I hope this has been helpful. I'd like to remind everyone that we partner with the APDA to work their exercise helpline. So if you have any questions about exercise or rehabilitation, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at the number or email listed on this slide. And we'll have this up again for you at the end of our question and answer period. So finally, I'd like to bring in my colleague, Nick Wendel. Nick's been helping me keep an eye on the comments and discussion that you've had. So I was hoping Nick could help us to start the question and answer period. Oh, Nick, I can't hear you, sorry.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries, I got you now.
Tim, thank you so much for the great presentation. There's been a lot of exciting comments, a lot of interest And I'm just going to kind of highlight a few of them because I think they were
Sure.
really insightful. While I'm doing that, feel free to ask any additional questions. I'll keep an eye out and we'll make sure everyone gets their questions answered. So there was a few people that really highlighted some of the situations that they experienced freezing, and I thought it kind of echoed some of the things that you had said. So I know John Root talked about how his freezing occurs in doorways, when turning, and when
Yeah.
starting out walking, which you mentioned a lot. Joel Stedman talked about transitions, so transitional flooring from carpet to wood.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and Keith Brombrowski brought up a good point that his freezing of gait happens when walking backwards. And he has a specific example of trying to back away from the toilet and mentioned his PT has started doing some specific movements with him. And so I just wanted to highlight some of those comments because I thought they were very insightful and talked about some of the things that you brought up.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, Nick, because there's a lot of things that can help, but kind of being really deliberate about figuring out where it's happening for you can help you prioritize what to try. So, for example, with the doorway, that's an area in your house where if it's safe for you, you could use those visual marks to get you through there. That could be really worth a shot because that's something that you have a lot of control over that environment. You can have someone help you get the lines just so, but that could be a really good example. Things like turning or initiating gait. Like I mentioned in that study, sometimes people find like that extra little weight shifting might help, but it's really important to try a few of these with a coach to see what would help the most.
Yeah, so there's been a few additional questions that have been coming in, so thank you to everyone. Frank asked if anyone's experienced freezing of gait improvement after deep brain stimulation, which I think you touched on briefly, but I was curious, Tim, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so it definitely can help if you're having problems with the time of day. So if your medications are wearing off, and that's really when you're experiencing it the most, potentially something like deep brain stimulation could help to sort of even out your day. But that's one of the reasons where if you're kind of not there yet, where you don't want to sign up for the deep brain stimulation, at a minimum, if you're noticing that your freezing is mainly tied in to the time of day and how long it's been since your last dose of your Parkinson medication, the first person you want to talk to about that is your neurologist, to make sure that they're looking through your schedule and making sure that everything is optimized for you. That's potentially something that they could help you with. So that's definitely something that we see, but this particular presentation, I would say we're kind of mainly focusing on the movement strategies, just because I'm sort of hoping you're seeing your neurologist regularly and making sure that everything from that standpoint is as optimized as it can be.
Yeah, and I think that goes along with a question that a number of people had about
Yeah.
the Ambresia inhaler, the new inhaler that's out, and asking if that could be helpful. Does that kind of fit in that same vein, Tim?
Yeah, I think theoretically that definitely fits in with the levodopa or the medication related question. But that definitely would be worth asking your neurologist if it's appropriate for you.
Another great question came in from Anne. She's been experiencing some freezing of gait in public places and was looking for any sort of positive affirmation or something to help kind of reduce the pressure when she's in those public places, because sometimes she needs to ask for a little bit of help. Do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I want you to know how common that question is that we get. And I really, I sort of see that as part of that, like kind of altering your mental state. But one of the things that is, it's sort of like the worst thing about this is that you're more likely to freeze when you have this sort of like time pressure, other people walking around you. It makes you freeze, and it makes you more likely to keep freezing. So it's important to try certain things like breathing exercises or relaxation techniques. Really, whatever works best for you to kind of manage that sort of stress or anxiety. Try to sort of shut that concern of other people rushing you out of your mind, because that it and I know this is easier said than done, but if you can find a nice way of doing that, I think it would really help you kind of keep your focus back on your feet, because with all the different types of cueing, again, the way we think they work is we're using those higher level movement centers in your brain to really concentrate in on putting one foot in front of the other. So if you can kind of find a way to relax yourself, get your attention back in there, and just stay really focused on your own feet. Try not to let anybody around you rush you. But I hope that helps.
Yeah, Tim, that was great. I think we have time for one more question, because there's been a lot of interest. We're trying to get as many as we can. And I think to end, Kiran Baja asked, when will some of these things be available? So I'm sure if you could just kind of highlight some of the things that you talked about that are already available and some that maybe are, coming into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is hard for me to answer, because I'm not personally on any of the research teams that are working on some of those newer devices, like the robotics or the augmented reality or the defog system that I mentioned, that on-demand auditory cueing. I will say a lot of the technology is already developed. It's more of sort of fine tuning the actual algorithms for how it's controlled and that sort of thing. But the augmented reality systems, for example, that is just using a new program on a commercially available system, like the ones from Microsoft and Apple and Google that you might have heard of already. But it does take years for something to go from research into a commercially available product. So I think the important thing is to keep focus on what's out there right now, just because I can definitely anticipate the frustration of, you're freezing now and you want to make sure you're getting yourself moving as safely as possible. So this is where that kind of earlier slide of things like the laser cueing module, if a visual cue is really helpful for you. So, those laser shoes or a laser cueing system for a walker or a cane. Though there are multiple systems like that are widely available. Or auditory cueing, right now you can have that delivered through something like a free metronome app, or even listening to music. Once you find the right cadence that works for you, sort of, kind of a slower, really easily apparent beat would be very helpful. So those are the things that I would try to steer you to try first, just because they're already available now.
Well, thank you so much, Tim, and thank you to all of the people in the chat. I've been following along and I've learned some things. I think you can all learn from each other. So thank you, Tim, and thank you to all of you for being so participating. This is a great event.
Thanks so much, Nick. I appreciate your help. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I wanted to mention, if we didn't get around to your questions, feel free to give us a call at the APDA exercise helpline, or email us at rehab@bu.edu. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope to see you at the next installment of Let's Keep Moving. So please stay tuned on the APDA website, where we'll be announcing our next date and topic. Thank you so much, and take care.
Leslie Chambers, President and CEO of the American Parkinson Disease Association. Thank you so much for joining us today on our program. Every day, APDA is committed to providing helpful programs just like this one, as well as a wide variety of support groups, exercise classes, and educational programs to support the Parkinson's disease community. Whether online or in person, APDA is here for you every step of the way. You can find all of our upcoming virtual events on our website at apdaparkinson.org/events. We keep you posted on our social media channels as well, so make sure you follow us there. You can also connect to local resources and events through our nationwide network of chapters and information and referral centers. Remember, we're just a click or a phone call away. If you've enjoyed today's broadcast, I hope you will consider making a donation to help keep programs like this possible. Every gift, large or small, helps APDA support people living with PD through thoughtful programming, reliable resources, groundbreaking research, and more. Please visit apdaparkinson.org/donate today to support our critical work for those with Parkinson's. We are so grateful for your generosity. Thank you.